With these 5 ingredients, we are going to make a delicious crusty loaf of bread. It's a faux or quick sourdough. And let me tell you something, that crunch you get with this, it's unbeatable. Let's put it together, make it so you can have this too. Bread can go from really easy, simple doughs like my honey wheat bread on the website. I call those really Midwestern homey breads. They can also go to really interesting, complex sourdoughs. This is kind of in between. This is a crusty, beautiful, artisan-looking bread. But what we're gonna do is make a poolish, which is a version of a sourdough starter, but it uses some commercial yeast to help get a fermentation going for a quick overnight starter that's gonna create more flavor in the dough and be just something that's really complex, but guess what? Super easy. And getting these crusty loaves, they look really hard, right? Like you have to go to a really good bakery. My whole point today is to show you, you can do it at home. It will take some time. I'm not gonna say this is like 1 hour. No, it takes a little bit, but each step is super easy. And I'm gonna take you through so when in the end, you get one that makes this beautiful crackly noise just like me, because that's what you want. So what it's starting with is super easy ingredients. So this poolish is something I would make the night before. I have one going so you can see what it looks like once we get to that process, but it's super simple. All you do is you take all-purpose flour. Now I like to use what I call a strong or high protein flour. So bread flour is a great flour to use. Also, certain brands just have a really high protein rate in their all-purpose flour. So sometimes I'll do that too, but something like a bread flour is a great one to use. It's gonna have a lot better structure in the bread. So we're gonna put our flour right in there. We're gonna also put some yeast. I always use instant yeast. That means it does not need to be bloomed in water. So we're gonna put that right in with the flour. And what I like to do is just mix that together so those two get combined. So we're just gonna mix that in, super easy. And now, water, equal parts water to the flour, pour it in. And once all that's in there, you just wanna whisk it. Now this is a very wet mixture. Don't think this is supposed to look like a dough, because it's not. This is only supposed to get that fermentation and flavor development going. So what I do is just mix it together. See, look at that's all it is. Super simple. It doesn't have to be perfectly, like if you see a few pieces of flour, that's okay. They work out. So what you wanna do now is always cover it. This one happens to have a lid. Cover it, let it sit at least 6 hours. I like to go overnight, slightly longer, because what's gonna happen during that is this beautiful process. So when you lift this back, look at that. This one to me is like, so what you see are bubbles that are active. It really looks kind of like a sourdough starter. And if you smell it, it has just, don't get scared of the word sour, but it has a slight fermented smell. And that's what you want, because that's what's gonna give this bread more flavor than just a one-note bread. It has actually a beautiful smell. I love that. This is a really simple part because you're just gonna dump everything together. So we have the poolish. We're gonna put it right down in there, also called a quick sourdough starter. You know, growing up, I'm someone that scoured every church cookbook we had, every spiral bound, you know those like homey ones that every organization would make? And there's a lot of sourdough recipes, they're called. And they're more what this is with a poolish, because it's a quick sourdough. So what we're gonna do is in this, we're gonna add some more flour, same flour we used before. I'm gonna put it right in. We're also going to put in a little bit, just a small amount of more yeast. Again, true sourdough is using wild yeast that lives in the air by fermenting things together and allowing that to grow. We are using instant yeast. We're gonna put that right in there. We're gonna put some wheat germ. So wheat germ, as you can see, it will add some nice texture and flavor to the bread. I think it's a way just to up it a little bit. We're gonna add that right in there. And then some water. So again, we're just adding the right ratio. We're not adding the salt yet because we don't want to counteract any of the yeast. And now we can just put it on the mixer. I'm putting the dough hook on. You know, a mixer like this makes it much easier to work with something like this. You're gonna notice that this is a much different dough than other flour doughs. It's gonna look very wet and shaggy. That is normal. You can see it's a really wet dough that's sticking. It looks like usually you would want to add a lot more flour. You don't want to, but this is where you want to add your salt. Salt is super important. It's going to actually flavor it. And the reason we add it now is we don't want it to inhibit that yeast. So I wanted the yeast to work in first. Then I wanted the salt to go in. And really all I'm doing is making sure that salt is getting worked into the dough now. And this is the beautiful part of this. It looks wrong. It's not. And now I'm still seeing a little bit of salt there, so I just want to make sure it's getting worked in fully. So I'm going to let this go for about a minute, and we'll move on. I'm taking the dough hook out, I have it off, and you can see it's a wet, sticky dough, but this is what's gonna give us that artisan, kind of airy but crunchy, beautiful crust of a bread that has a really nice texture inside. So what I first wanna do is have a bowl that we're gonna let it rise in, and we're gonna make sure it's oiled because it was just gonna be easier. It's a sticky dough, and this works out easier to have it nicely oiled. Not too much, just enough here. And then we're gonna just take all this beautiful dough, and I just like to work it up with this, and put it right into that bowl that we just oiled. Now, if there's some in the bottom, just go back in, get any of those pieces of dough. You don't want to waste it. Now, this is where, for the first hour and a half of rising, we're gonna fold it. We're gonna do 3 folds. And every time we fold it, which at this point, this doesn't count as one, but I wanna show you, we'll do more here. You're just gonna fold it over itself like 4 times, 3 different moments during that first 90 minutes. That's gonna help develop structure in the bread, help it create more of a structure and texture that you want in the end. So what I'm gonna do is cover this up. We're gonna let it rise. Now, if you want to, you can put it in a warm spot in your kitchen. You can just let it sit. Sometimes, depending on the warmth, coldness, it's gonna take longer or shorter. I'm gonna cover this with plastic so you can see it, and I'll show you a fold. So in the first hour and a half of rising, we like to fold it 3 times. And that's because, why? It really helps that structure of the bread and creates that structure by stretching those strands of protein, of that gluten, and putting them back together. And this is why it's really important. So all I do is go in and give it a nice fold over itself. You can see I'm doing this about 4 times in total. And I'm just using a nice malleable scraper. And what this does is it really helps that structure to develop in that bread. So now this is the 3rd time I've done that. It looks pretty much the same each time. Do it 3 times in that first hour and a half. And now I let it sit and rise until it's doubled in size. No more folding. This is really, it takes some time as far as minutes, hours, but your hands-off time is a lot. And in the end, you have such a beautiful, simple bread. So I'm gonna put this back on. I'm using plastic wrap just so you can see what's going on. You can use a reusable wrap at home. And then we're gonna let this go, and soon we're gonna put it into our bowl, let it rise its final time, and bake it. The dough has been rising. You can see it's about doubled in size. So I have a proofing bowl, Banneton bowl. So these are like a rattan bowl. That's what gives you that traditional boule shape of a bread that has that beautiful lines in them. And what I'm making sure to do is really coating it with flour. Same flour I used when I was making it. I just make sure to get it all along because this is, like we have mentioned many times, it's a very sticky, wet dough. So making sure this is well floured is going to ensure that it comes out of here, and you're gonna see that we need to take it out of here. So this is its final rise. What we have here is our dough, and look how beautiful it is. You can see how wet still it is, and that's what you want. You want that wet structure. That ratio of flour to water in this case is super important because that's what's gonna give us the bread we are all wanting. So what I'm doing is just knocking it down, as in taking out any of those air bubbles that are working up in it, the carbon dioxide, and we are just folding it, but also just kneading out kind of all of those bubbles. And this is the beautiful process now that's gonna finish this all up. And that's where I'm gonna put it right into this bowl. So during this time too, the important part is preheating the oven. But not only that, is getting a vessel ready that we're going to actually bake the bread in. So we're gonna bake this in a large Dutch oven. So what I'm gonna do is just kind of turn this out. Now, if you need to, once you have this out, it was well oiled, but you could put a little flour on your hands, just tap it around on it, just so you can easily push it together and put it right into your bowl. Now, if you want to, you can pinch it just to make sure you get kind of a nice shape on the bottom, so everything's coming up. And then I even like to flour a little bit over the top just to make sure it's not gonna stick to anything. I don't want any sticking. I wanna make sure it's very well floured all around it. So what I have here is a large Dutch oven. I'm going to preheat this in the oven for the hour that this is doing its final rise. So it's super hot and gonna create a little like miniature steam oven in our big oven at home. So this is screaming hot, meaning it has been in the oven for that hour preheating, and that's what you want. So I have it obviously on a hot pad. I have baked bread in here before, so there's a little bit of residue on the bottom. But now what we're gonna do, just remember please that it's hot, because if you touch it, it's not good. So what we're gonna do here is take our bread that has been rising, and you can see here what I wanna do, this is maybe the one tricky part of this, and that's just making sure I can turn it upside down and put it on this parchment. But you can see, just have confidence. Just do it. Don't overthink it. Don't worry about it being perfect because it doesn't need to be. What I'm going to do is take my bread lom, you can use a sharp knife too, and just make a nice deep cut. I like to make it kind of a half noon cut. This is a relief cut. So when it's in the oven, when it pops, it knows where to cut open, pretty much. Then what we do is we take our 4 corners, and just remember, while you're watching me do this, in your kitchen, no one's gonna be watching you. So you don't have to worry about it being exactly the way this looks. We're gonna put it right into this hot Dutch oven. I'm gonna put 3 ice cubes. This is gonna create a little bit of steam in there. So just like a steam injected oven that commercial kitchens use, it's gonna help give this more oven spring. We're gonna cover it, put it back into that oven for 30 minutes, remove the lid, let it bake an additional 15-20 minutes, and we're done. So when this bread was finished, I obviously brought it out of the oven. It was hot, but what I do is I check the temperature of it. You want it to be between 205, 210 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a good crusty artisan bread. That's how the internal temperature should be. That's when you know it's done. You can of course do, this is just a little warm still, but the whole thumping, making sure it sounds somewhat hollow. But you know what? Check the temperature. That takes it out. So then you want to remove it from the Dutch oven. Use hot pads, something that you can handle, because you want to set it on so it doesn't get a soft bottom. But then you can just let it cool. So this has been cooling for a little while. And we'll let it cool because the hot bread should not be cut right away. It will not cut correctly. But then you can now just cut it however you want. Now, this is really up to you how you want to cut a beautiful artisan loaf like this. But what it's going to have is a beautiful texture. And what I want to do is just open it up. Look at that beautiful bread. Now what you can do is cut big slices. I a lot of times will actually, it still has some nice warmth to it. I will like to go through sometimes and then cut it like this. It just kind of depends what you want. But to me, I think these smaller slices sometimes will give you more of the pieces you're gonna, serve with soup. It just kind of depends if you want to use it for a sandwich, for soup. But look at that gorgeous texture. That's why we did the folds. That's why we made a poolish. Because if you smell this, it even has a great smell. Reminiscent of a sourdough, not quite as strong as some of those classic sourdoughs that are fermented for days and have a mother that keeps going. This is just as it is, but you can see, you get that beautiful crust. You get the flavor. It's so good. And what I love about it is you get the nice chew with that crust with a soft interior. Now, the only thing it needs is a really good slathering, some good salted butter. That right on top is all you need. This is great toasted up. It's great to use for sandwiches. It's great to sop up sauces, soups, whatever you have. And it's also gorgeous for gifts. And guess what? All your friends, once you start making this, you're gonna become the bread baker. And everyone's gonna want your bread. And you're gonna be able to tell them it's super easy, or don't tell them, let it be your secret. It can be your secret bread, and it's just between us, and that's fine. So that's what I hope you do with this recipe. Hope you're excited to try something new, excited to try a really good crusty loaf at home without as much work as some of the others will be, because it's a quick overnight sourdough, a quick poolish that makes it super simple. And guess what? It's gonna make you a master of bread. So check my website, wyseguy.com, for this recipe. Share this video around so other people can see it's easy. If I can do it, you can do it. And enjoy some bread, because I know I'm going to.